I want to speak with you about the professorship in Catholic thought at the University of Toledo, recently established and periodically in the news. My own sense is that has been an important cultural event for the University of Toledo and really eventually with a national significance. It is, the money was given for it by private donors, mostly Catholics, but not entirely so. Some collected something like $450,000. That money was then given to the university under a contract. The contract calls for an expert in Catholic thought to be brought to the campus 1 quarter a year and to teach 2 courses and to be ready to give a public lecture. The choice of that professor is finally in the hands of the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. He has appointed a committee to help assist him in that process. So that's generally what it is about. The significance of it, in my mind, is that it is a response to a definite cultural need. And there's many ways of dealing with the professorship and that kind of question. One is from a legal viewpoint. And I wonder if you could just summarize for me your perceptions of that professorship in Catholic thought in terms of legalities and whether it's constitutional or not.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Jim. I think, first of all, that the university may obviously be concerned with an area of important information in the background of the intellectual background of our world. And the fact that the church, that a church, an individual church, the church is not involved in the thing, does not sponsor the professorship, that it does not select the people who are going to exercise that professorship or enjoy that professorship at various times, and so on, clearly puts it outside the usual framework of church and state. And it precludes the likelihood that there's going to be an entanglement of the church and the state, which is one of the criteria of the so-called Lemon Test. Mm-hmm. There be no entanglement between church and state, or church and any public institution, because there's no church involved in the thing. You have private persons who have felt the need for this kind of professorship and who have contributed generously from a lot of different sources to make it possible. They've given the money to the university. The university picks out its people to do the teaching. It is not required to get the approval of the church or churchmen with regard to the speakers that it picks. It picks them on ordinary academic criteria. Now, there's another...
And the contract specifies that be the case, incidentally. The contract says the professor shall be appointed by the university in accordance with the general procedures of the university and with all funds to come from the endowment. Now, in other words, the people are paid out of the interest that comes from this endowment given to the university.
Which is in the hands of the university, yes.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
I don't see
technically, it's in the hands of the University of Toledo Foundation, but that is not germane when you're looking at the legal test here, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the university could not, as a matter of fact, approve the initiative were it not for that kind of condition in the contract. I think it's quite plain that the university could invite other religious groups or accept the initiative of other religious individuals to establish things that would look at other aspects of Western religious tradition. Mm-hmm. But the other point, of course, is that there's a criterion that the Supreme Court has been poking around at called endorsement. It was proposed by Justice O'Connor about 5 or 6 years ago in a Rhode Island Christmas crib case. And Justice O'Connor said that if anything that is done by a public institution would seem to the ordinary citizen to constitute an endorsement of a particular religion or religious position, then it should be forbidden under the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Establishment Clause. But when you're looking at college students who are not in any way compelled to take this course, who don't have to take it to meet the requirements for a degree program, who have alternatives in terms of the humanities component of their degree program, and the fact that they are mature young adults who are whose intellects are being educated to be able to discriminate and to look critically at proposals that are made to them and look at the kinds of things that are represented by public activities and so on, it seems to me very clear that you evade the prospect that it violates the Establishment Clause because of representing some sort of endorsement. Mm-hmm. The university endorses the idea of looking at all knowledge, that's the whole concept of the university, as being the object of man's intellectual efforts and growth, and this is part of it.
Mm-hmm. So you think that it is constitutional because it does not violate the provisions of the so-called Lemon Test, nor is it coercive, and nor does it involve some sort of endorsement of a particular religion.
That's right. I think it meets the constitutional criteria quite comfortably.
That the Supreme Court has laid down over the years
That's
in
right.
many different cases.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's a position I think that some people might argue with and disagree with,
Sure.
and is open for discussion, and the discussion is welcome because it helps to clarify the matter and seems to me to be generally a positive thing to discuss these things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another way to begin to approach all this, and it's been my own preferred method, and that is that what stands behind the establishment of the professorship in Catholic thought at the University of Toledo is the general problem of religious illiteracy in our culture. My opinion would be that the public schools do not do a good job in general of handing on the heritage, the religious heritage that has helped shape Western civilization and the ethos in our own country. For example, how can you understand the dominant culture in the United States without understanding something about Calvinistic Protestantism?
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible because it is such a shaping influence. How do you understand our history without understanding the experience of the Catholic immigrants who came into this Calvinistic country and were part of the general interaction, creating a mosaic, if that's a good image? Some people say melting pot. I like mosaic better for what we have in our country. So you simply cannot understand so much of our own civilization. If you just take the classic things, I mean, if you go to the Sistine Chapel, it would be a little bit hard to interpret what is there, the artistic work of Michelangelo, without knowing biblical references, for example.
That's right.
What are you going to do with Bach's Passion? Or, I mean, you cannot understand these things without having some religious knowledge. And the fact of the matter is that in our culture generally, because public education has not done a good job of handing this on, and I might say very often religious groups have not done a very good job, and we have to take special blame here, I think, in the Catholic community in the last 25 years. Many of us feel we have not done a good job of handing on the religious heritage. So from many viewpoints, we end up being impoverished. And you can say, well, so what? Well, it's not so what, because it's at the very wellspring of who we are. We've got questions of values. I mean, we've got questions now of drug problems and crime in the streets. And what kind of moral stance do we take? A lot of this is based in religious traditions. If you don't know the traditions, it's very hard to make moral cases against that kind of behavior that seems to be really making it difficult for our culture to flourish.
Mm-hmm. I think there's not any question of that, and I also think it's true of the other religious traditions that have played large roles in the development of this Western civilization that has been handed down to us and forms the intellectual context of our world and our way of looking at our world.
We'd have to look at the Judaic tradition, for example. It is so important. I might point out, Bob, that one of the things that I have tried to do in relationship to this professorship in Catholic thought is to encourage the other religious groups in the area to do something similar. What a marvelous mix we would have at the University of Toledo if we had a chair in Judaic studies, Protestant studies, Islamic studies, Eastern studies. It would give our students a wonderful opportunity to explore the world's great religious traditions. You know, there's a saying that I put it this way these days: if you want world peace, then you must promote religious cooperation. If you want religious cooperation, you must promote religious dialogue and understanding. I think we see that in Bosnia, you can see that in Ireland, you see it in the Middle East, where there are religious roots to many of the problems we have. Many of the ethnic conflicts that have now become much more difficult for us around the globe are rooted in religious differences. We cannot have peace and harmony without religious understanding. That's so this religious illiteracy thing is not just one more thing. Well, I don't happen to know how to work a VCR or what the main principles of physics are. The world can go on without me as an individual knowing that. But when we got a whole bunch of people who don't know the religious traditions, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'm not sure I would go quite as far as you as seeing religion as being one of the real components of the hostilities that separate people, but it certainly gives another coloring of legitimacy to the reasons to dislike someone else, and that's part of the problem. But there's another side of the thing, too, that I think has to concern you as you look at this professorship of Catholic thought at the university, and that is that in the measure that we don't have offerings at the university yet in these other traditions that you've mentioned, the Protestant Western tradition, the Islamic tradition, the Judaic tradition that contains our own roots, the Eastern Christian traditions. As long as we don't have information on those things, the picture of the Catholic tradition itself is going to be diminished, because in so many ways these different influences have played upon one another and have helped to shape the responses that each one has made to the challenges of human experience in the West and to its expression in art and so on. And so that as long as that's not being done, then this itself is going to be limping in some measure.
I think you're right, and it becomes especially clear when you look at the history in the United States. I mean, we are such a conglomerate of so many different traditions, and continue to be so, with the influx of Asian immigrants and people bringing the Hindu and Buddhist tradition into our midst. We see it clearly with the interaction with the Islamic community. We have so many international students on our campus, people who practice the Muslim faith, and for whom that is a whole worldview, a whole outlook on life. It's a very unified and beautiful system that they put together, and it's absolutely vital to understand it. So your general point seems to me to be intensified when we look at the particular experience here in the United States. We must untangle that and understand it in better fashion.
Yeah, that's very true. And one of the things that disappoints me when people take a critical approach to this professorship is the want of confidence in the ability of the American people to work out the kinds of differences that we bring with us when we come to this country and become part of the American experience in the American world. We've done such a wonderful job of making all kinds of liberties open and possible to people, whatever the background is, that I think that we have a great deal to be proud of in terms of our ability to live with differences, to understand the importance of tolerance, and not just tolerance, but of mutual respect for people who share a great deal of common interest and yet come from different backgrounds and with different traditions and different perspectives as they approach it.
I think, Bob, we in the Catholic community have made great strides in this regard because of the Second Vatican Council and because of the great work of John Courtney Murray, one of your favorite authors, on the whole question of religious liberty. In other words, we in the Catholic community have learned to appreciate now the importance of liberty, the importance of not being coercive in religious matters, of offering people freedom, and the idea that that is when religion flourishes. Religion flourishes in a situation of freedom.
That's
and
right.
Has then a greater opportunity to use its liberating powers to help humanize the world.
Sure. You and I both grew up in what was a voluntary ghetto, a voluntary religious ghetto when we were kids.
Right.
You lived in a neighborhood and went to a neighborhood church and a Catholic school, and you may have known some of the neighbors who belonged to different religious traditions, but by and large our whole life was circled by that religious community to which we belonged, and thank heavens we've gotten out of that and grown past it.
In a much broader kind of situation that we live in today. And so the Catholic professorship is designed as a catalyst to help move us in this direction. I mean, we would be happiest if other groups were able to find funding for professorships and or chairs, which would take over $1 million as campuses are constructed these days, to have a full-time person come. That would be a real ideal. But also, Bob, part of my own sense of this thing is to help create a national movement. I've been very interested in this problem, not just here in Northwest Ohio, but around the country, because religious illiteracy plagues us wherever you go in the country. And so I have been pushing the idea of establishing these professorships in religious thought all around the country. And I must say I'm finding interest in this now. And there are some people with large amounts of money who are willing to do this, and some even who don't have large amounts who are very generous in their giving. We had a lawyer in Sandusky, Ohio, Tom Murray, who, to honor his parents, gave $250,000 to help establish this professorship in Catholic thought. It's an example of the way some people understand the situation. They're saying if we want moral values, if we want to have a more humane society, then we must explore the roots of that morality and that fundamental ethos. So that I believe there are people like this around the country, and I have been getting calls from other universities where they are finding these people. University of Massachusetts is interested in establishing some sort of a professorship as we're describing it here. Mm-hmm. And the University of Iowa State at Ames is interested, so that I'm finding this. The University of Kansas is another one. And my hope is that we use this as a tool to come to grips with this religious illiteracy that I think plagues us.
The experience of the Catholic tradition itself, not just the formal official church, the governance of the church itself, but the Catholic community throughout the world, because it is Catholic, because it penetrates pretty much all of the Western world at least, and a great deal of other more remote parts that are more remote from our tradition, has learned an awful lot and has an awful lot to say about the kinds of problems that our world faces. There's a richness simply from the experience and the reflection of people upon that experience that we somehow or another have to help to bring to bear to help us to meet the problems as we see them, to enlarge our dimensions, to enlarge our perspectives on the world in which we live, to be able to see that the world is a lot bigger than just our neighborhood or our own immediate problems, even those of our own country, but we're part of a world which is smaller all the time.
One of the things we're doing in the latest course that I'm going to coordinate myself in the spring quarter at the University of Toledo, it actually starts March 30th and is open to the general public through our continuing education division at the university. They're able to come to hear the lectures by the 9 visiting scholars, but the course has the premise that you were mentioning there, that the Catholic tradition has something to say about important cultural questions. It doesn't have all the answers, and it's interested in dialoguing with other traditions to find the answers, but we have a particular slant, a perspective, and a wisdom accumulated over the centuries that we would like to put forward in the public arena to say how we're going to deal with these questions. So we have people coming in, for example, the well-known Jesuit Richard McCormick will talk on bioethics. What does the Catholic tradition say on these great questions we have today about keeping people alive and dealing with the small babies? And we have lecturers coming in to talk about changing roles of men and women, environmental questions. What does religion have to say about that? Racism, self-identity questions. John Shea is coming to talk about that. And the question of fundamentalism, which gets raised not only in the United States and in Christian circles, but also with Islamic fundamentalism. And a lot of debate about that. What does it mean? Is it a proper term? We have the wonderful Lutheran thinker Martin Marty on May 18th coming in on a Tuesday to talk at 3 o'clock at the university on that question of fundamentalism. He probably knows more about it than most anybody in the world, since he's editing a 5-volume set on that very question. And we have someone talking about marriage. I mean, you think of the divorce rate. Where is the wisdom in the traditions? So we come at this of saying the Catholic Church has something to offer, the Catholic tradition, a wisdom, and we put it forward. We want to look at it. We want to explore it. Not saying you got to buy into it, you got to agree with it. We want to critique it. As we know, some of the professors coming will be very critical of the Catholic tradition, even though many of them stand within that tradition. But one talking on the role of women has already told me that this is going to be a harsh statement about the Catholic community's long history of patriarchy and sexism and so on. That will be part of the presentation. So it is a self-critical thing, but the overall purpose is to understand the tradition, to critically assess it, and to see how it might help us deal with these major concerns like the environment, marriage, and so on.
Yes, and that looking at that past and looking at the way that the questions that face us today have come to be framed over time as conditions of life change, as the world in which we live is more and more the object of technology, the application of scientific development to the kinds of problems we have and so on. That understanding, a deeper understanding of the past, an understanding of the way things were, and being able to contrast that with what things are, isn't going to give us the answers, as you know perfectly well, as you've been saying, to the problems we have today. But what it does do, and the thing that seems to me to be critically important in what it does, is that it helps us to frame the questions the right way today, so we don't waste time asking ourselves things that have been asked and answered and tried before, that we can see what's different, what's new, in the way that this evokes some kind of new response from the depth of our experience and of our religious faith, as well as our common
sense. This is one of the great values of the discipline we call theology, and it comes up in religious studies. The desire is, how do you frame the question? What perspectives do you bring to bear upon it? And what wisdoms can you muster from the tradition to help us examine it? I think that's a very important part of all this. The syllabus for the course will say things like, in this course, I'm coordinating it myself, the classroom is not a place for proselytizing or for witnessing. A classroom is a place for intellectual work, for academic study, for objectively looking at questions. And in this case, what does the Catholic tradition say about these major cultural concerns?
Sure, and there's no question that obviously ideas do inspire some people in one way or another. We have to be ready for an idea for it to affect us profoundly, perhaps. But by the same token, whatever anybody is teaching, however it happens to be taught, the personality of the teacher, the conviction the teacher brings to the presentation of the material that he's doing, the ideas themselves are attractive, or
That's
they
right.
can be repugnant.
That's right.
In
other words, what we're saying here does not rule out passion. In other words, what you would hope in bringing in these guest lecturers to talk about a topic is that they bring passion to it. That doesn't mean that it is moved out of the academic realm. Care, concern. What is important is that one is able to surface one's presuppositions. One is able to be self-critical about the hypotheses that one posits. One has to try to examine the history of the question and so on. That's all the academic enterprise. But that can be done in conjunction with, and ought to be done in conjunction with, passion, concern for the topic, and convictions and commitments. That's part of being human. The idea that there's value-free teaching in any discipline is ridiculous, because nobody comes at it value-free. Everyone, even if that was your presupposition, I must be value-free, that becomes your value. And so it's simply not real.
Yeah, that whole notion of value-free study or value-free thought or expression is so ridiculous, and yet it's misled a lot of people. And we fail to see that every time we endorse a position, every time we take a position, we are endorsing some kind of a value, that it has some meaning to us that seems to make it worth our while. And you and I both know perfectly well the point. I'd like to reiterate that point you made, that we can't really do a good job of teaching. We can't really do a good job of understanding anything unless we bring a measure of very real concern, very real passion to the subject. And yet at the same time, that passionate respect for the subject demands that we convey it as objectively and as fairly and impartially as we possibly can.
That's an ideal that the professors should take, and that we want to uphold within this course. We had a course last year, Bob, that on current trends in Catholic thought, taught at the university under the aegis of this Professorship in Catholic Thought, that drew 110 undergraduate students and drew many people from the community who came to hear the guest lectures. In fact, we had to turn people away. The room sat only 350 people. We turned people away. Some watched a video of it in the evening. We had 40 people showing up for that. And so it's a real interest there, and one that we're tapping. I wanted to save time, Bob, to get another notion in here that goes back to your favorite author, John Courtney Murray, and his analysis. His point about all this is that students have a right to explore their heritage and the religious roots of their friends. In other words, in the United States, we got Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, we have members, Buddhists, Hindus, and Murray's point is that to be educated means that you look at the whole range of human experience, and you are able to try to understand the well springs of your culture, that you need to be able to look at what has shaped your personality and the personal story you are living out. And that therefore students, since religion plays a role in that, 90% of the people in the United States say they're believers, high percentage are related to religious institutions, it's in the air we breathe to be in the United States, that students have a right to have the opportunity to pursue this in an academically sound fashion.
Without being pushed to do it, but certainly for it to be open to them, just as we expect that history and the use of language and the use of number skills to be open to them too, so this.
Yeah, so we talk about rights. That's an important category, isn't it? To explore rights.
Yeah, and people are never more cruelly cheated than when they don't even know that they are being cheated or of what they are being cheated. That's the sad thing.
Yeah, in other words, you could go through a public school system, go through public universities in the United States, and not really realize the importance of religion in the shaping of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's very possible to do. Someone has said popular culture gives you that same viewpoint. You watch television, you would never know that 90% of the people in the country say, by Gallup poll, they believe in God. You never know that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And if there's any institution in our society that is supposed to project that sense of the richness of our culture, our heritage, it is the university.
It's where it ought to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a step forward. Now, our sense would be the University of Toledo could become a model for other schools. And we would have a professorship in Catholic thought and one in Islamic thought, Judaic thought, Protestant thought, Buddhist, Hindu. That would be a wonderful mix, and what a marvelous opportunity for students then to explore what's going on in the world. What are the well springs of the various cultures that we have, and how are we going to interact better? And back to my point of saying if we want world peace, if we want harmony, we must have religious dialogue, religious cooperation. That's going to require religious understanding. And that's a key word, understanding, when we're looking at a university setting, because that's what these courses in Catholic thought are all about, to try to probe it, get at it, analyze it, critically assess it, and see what happens that way. Well, we're running out of time here, and we've been looking at the Professorship in Catholic Thought at the University of Toledo, trying to, you did a nice summary at the beginning on the legal aspects, and from your vantage point, you do not see it as a violation of the Constitution. Some people would disagree with you, and that becomes a debatable point. But my major thing is that we've got a religious illiteracy problem, and this is at least one way of attacking that constructively.